All right. Well, hello and welcome to all of our viewers this evening. On behalf of Roanoke College, I welcome each of you to the series NOKELive from Washington, D.C. It's Healthcare Night. My name is Brian Parsons, and I'm Associate Professor of Political Science and the Chair of the Department of Public Affairs. I'm co-hosting this evening with my colleague, Dr. Shannon Anderson, who is Associate Professor of Sociology and the Coordinator of Public Health Studies program here at Roanoke. This event is co-sponsored by the Office of Alumni and Family Relations, Sociology and Public Health Studies, and Public Affairs. Before we get started, please know that each of you viewing via YouTube can use the chat feature to ask questions of our guests. Once the presentation and conversation is coming to an end, Dr. Anderson and I will select and ask as many of your questions as possible. Tonight's event is being recorded and will be available on this YouTube channel for future viewing. A link to our past NOKELive events, as well as other online content, can be found on the Alumni Hub at roanoke.edu/alumni. This evening's NOKELive topic is Healthcare on the Hill. This is the first event in this series this academic year. We began this series last year with Dr. Rodney Whitlock, a Roanoke College graduate from the class of '87, who will also be co-hosting with us this evening. Dr. Whitlock has gained over 25 years of experience on the Hill, working in both houses of Congress in the area of healthcare policy. During his tenure, he managed the Patient's Bill of Rights, served as the lead Republican staffer for Medicaid legislation from 2005 to 2010, and helped staff Republicans in the Senate on important legislation such as the Deficit Reduction Act, the Tax Relief and Healthcare Act, the CHIP Reauthorization Acts, and the Affordable Care Act. For the last 20 years, Rodney has been an adjunct faculty member at the George Washington University Milken Institute School of Public Health in the Department of Health Policy and Management, and the Graduate School of Political Management in the Department of Legislative Affairs. It is now my pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Rodney Whitlock to introduce our guests and begin tonight's conversation.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for kicking off a second season. We got renewed for a second year, so thank you all very much for being here and doing this with us. I'd like to begin tonight by introducing a couple of my friends. I have on one side of my screen Lauren G. Lauren G is she has a little bit of an accent, just like I do. Comes from well south of the Beltway. From Mississippi, and went to the University of Mississippi Law School, as I recollect, is where you have a degree from. Worked on the Hill, particularly in the Senate side, where you and I worked together for a number of years. And now you're working inside in the administration. Listen, you guys have your titles over there, so I know they have a lot of words in them. So you're assistant of something, a secretary of this, or what? What's your actual title?
It's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Legislation, specifically for mandatory health programs.
When you're on the inside, you got at least 8 words in your title. That's the case. When you're on the Hill, it's hey you. But when you're on in the administration, lots of words. Other side, I have Leslie Zelenko, who is, my recollection is your local, Walter Johnson, right? Before heading off to the University of Wisconsin, go Badgers, and then you worked in for Senator from Wisconsin, Ms. Baldwin, before moving over to the House side to work with Congressman Pocan, and then now you have a title with lots of words in it. And what is that one?
Senior Advisor and Congressional Liaison for the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Legislation.
I'm telling you, this is cool. Your business card has it folds out 3 times to catch out all the words you have on it. So this is wonderful. So listen, what we've done here with these historically is, for the students back at my alma mater, that's where it is just over my head here, that we go through and just talk about what you do. Because for them who are in southwestern Virginia, where I'm from, that it's an opportunity for them to see what we do here in DC, and just to understand what's out there, what the possibilities, what you can do if you move on to try other things in your life. So let me start with this opening question, and Lauren, I'll go to you, and then Leslie, which is, okay, what are you doing now in your day-to-day? What is this day-to-day job that you do with all the words in your title?
Okay, sure. So first of all, I just want to say like, hey, I'm from very rural Mississippi. I happen to be there right now. So like Southwest Virginia, you're totally doing fine. But first of all, for the day-to-day, I think I'm still getting used to it. I'm relatively new, about 3 months in. But a lot of the work that I did on the Hill was interacting with other Hill offices. So I get to do that still today. So it's getting to interact with Hill offices on the House side and the Senate side, making sure that they have requests that come in that need help for their hospitals or their health providers, or questions about, policy that's being discussed, how we can help them either offer technical assistance or, policy recommendations. So I do a lot of that interaction with the Hill, and then also try to bring back what the Hill is concerned about or interested in to the secretary, and then making sure that we're also representing the secretary and his interactions and what he cares about to the Hill.
So a lot of it is knowing what's going on and being able to communicate that is key, so that everybody is to the same message, right?
Yes, but sometimes I feel like I don't really know what's going on. So
I can understand. All right, Leslie, your side of the world.
Yeah, so in my current role, I am the liaison, so writ large. I don't cover specific programs the way Lauren does, where she's handling all of the Medicare and Medicaid issues. I'm really cross-cutting, and so it's my job to kind of be available to the members and to the staff at all times for all issues. I think strategically about who the secretary needs to be engaging with and when. Are we making specific announcements? Are we announcing funding that is important to specific members? And should we give them a heads up so that they feel like they've gotten that special touch? We know it's important to them. I also help with the secretary's travel. So when he's going to specific states, making sure that we are inviting the elected representatives to join us and make sure that we're highlighting those important things. So more of the strategic thinking, cross-cutting side. I also handle, you'll appreciate this, Rodney, I'm almost back to being a legislative correspondent again. I handle all of the mail we get from Congress. And it's an interesting flip to have been a congressional staffer sending lots of letters to different administrations, demanding answers and asking questions, and now being on the other side of receiving those requests and having to get answers back to members of Congress. So
let me build on where you went a moment ago, because you are, a former student of mine. Now, once every blue moon or so, I'll get a student that has no business being in my class. They should be teaching the class. You absolutely were one. I mean, I think you're in on the joke here, which is you're like, the only person to get a perfect score in years, and everything we did. You're like, you knew everything we were teaching. I mean, it was like, it wasn't even fair having you in the class, but it was fun because you knew everything. You've done it. And so, as I recall, you were in the class where we talked about, the executive legislative relations side and how it was going, how the executive branch tries to work with the legislative branch. Well, now you're on the inside. I'm just curious, were those things that we taught you, were they sort of right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I think I have to admit, our class was during the beginning of the pandemic, so it's all a blur, right? But I think, this is my experience. Like I've always said, like you never really know what it's like until you're in it, and that's why I got into politics, because I was always interested in government and what was happening in the news. And I just felt like my courses weren't giving me enough of how it actually worked. And so that's why I wanted to get involved. And I will stand by that. I think that's absolutely true. What you read and what you learn is different than what you actually experience, except for Rodney's class, where you get it from the people that did it. And I really appreciated that because it was like real talk. So shout out to GW for giving me that opportunity. Yeah.
So, Lauren, you are doing you're doing more substantive, you pick a subject matter and you run with it, whereas Leslie's got a different role, and it's fun to play off these roles. So if you think about it in your experience on the Hill, where you were a substantive staffer for Senator Cardin, that do you benefit from the specialization you did there in healthcare and now being even more specialized in the frame you're doing there? I mean, how does that help you in what you do?
Most definitely. When I was in Cardin's office, I was very lucky that I had a lot of autonomy and I had to really own the portfolio, which was healthcare. And so now that I'm with Secretary Becerra's office, I own Medicare, Medicaid, and the ACA. And so one thing that has really helped is briefing the boss on a subject matter issue, right? Which can be very technical. And this happened, Leslie's nodding because this happened last week. And the whole time I was briefing the secretary, I'm like, oh my God, he's a cabinet secretary. Oh, am I going to get this wrong? Am I get this right? But I just pretended like he was Ben Cardin. And I just talked to him like he was a normal person and talked to him like I would talk to anybody to explain the issue. And I think it served me well because he understood the IPPS, which is, I think, inpatient physician payment system. I don't know. Very technical, very complicated. He got it at the end of the call. I was doing good. But yeah, my skill set in briefing the senator and going down those roads of what happens if you do this, or how do you feel about that? How does a member react with this news? That serves me when I'm briefing him as well. So, I just have to remember it's Ben Cardin, not the cabinet secretary, and I'm not as intimidated.
And it's trying to remember your job is to explain things. And that we all did it on the Hill, when we were there, which is, the member may be good, maybe really good, but your job is to be better and explain complex concepts in ways that they can understand. And when it's going sideways, there's nothing that feels worse in those moments. I can picture being on the floor once with John Kyle of Arizona, and I was going down and I was like, oh, I can just see his face getting red and it's going to go badly here, because you try as hard as you can, but it's that skill that you got to have. And so clearly you brought a skill from the Hill in with you. So that's something that was fun.
She was a rock star.
Thank you.
So Leslie, now your side of the world, do you find yourself looking at people and saying, was I like this to the folks in the Office of Legislation when I was on the Hill? Do you ever find yourself in that situation where you're like, wait, okay, come on, cut me some slack here, and you're thinking, ooh, did I cut slack when I was there? Yeah.
I think I see my role as trying to put myself in my shoes from my last position. When I was contacting the Office of Legislation, it was usually because my boss had a question about something about information the Department of Health and Human Services had or data they had that I couldn't find publicly, and I needed their assistance in getting that information or feedback. And a lot of the times my boss had a tight turnaround deadline. He wanted that information by the end of the day. And I think I communicated that to the folks in my position now. I would say to them, hey, this is for the congressman and he really needs this. We've got this going on. And sometimes they would get it to me and sometimes they wouldn't. And I think now sitting on the other side, I see how much they're handling. It's not just one member of Congress, it's 500, right, who you're dealing with. And so plus committee staff and everything like that. And so I think I have that perspective. But what I really try and do is, what information did I wish I had as a congressional staffer doing health policy that I have at my fingertips now, the Department of Health, that I can share with them? That's public, that's accessible, that would be helpful for them to serve their constituents, that would be helpful to their members to uplift the issues that they care about. And so that's really what I view my position as seeing that across the board.
Now, for you in your new role, when you need to know something, you don't just go Google it. I mean, it's got to be pretty cool to have the resources at your disposal now, as opposed to when you were on the Hill, because HHS, I hear, is a relatively large place with lots of people. So, I mean, have you gotten comfortable with the idea, wait, I can phone a friend and their job is to talk to me? I mean, that, again, I never worked on your side of the street, so I'm just thinking that's got to be cool, right?
So I really like that, of being able to phone a friend, because sometimes I have to, sometimes I do a briefing to the Hill when the subject matter experts aren't available. So they'll tell me really quickly, and then I have to learn it, and then I have to go to the Hill. But I do Google every once in a while just to make sure like I'm asking the right questions. But yeah, it's really awesome to have like CMS, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, at my fingertips, where I can just ask them a question and they get right back to me with like an answer, and a very detailed answer. It's really nice.
As opposed to when you're on the Hill and trying to get the same thing. Leslie, how have your experiences been trying to get used to, wait, I can call people?
I feel like Lauren probably has a better understanding of this because she's doing the real technical work. But I will say it's great to be able to have the resources across the board and know who to contact. Like, I think a lot of times, because the department's so huge, when you're on the Hill, you just don't know. You find one person's email and they answer you, and that's who you email for everything, even if they don't handle that issue, right? And I think now that I'm on this side, to be able to see this person engages, does this type of stuff at CMS, or they handle all the insurance side stuff, or, actually it's the Office of Head Start that's dealing with this, with the Child Services, the Child Bureau, and they do the adoption stuff. And that's where you go for those issues. And so, it's funny, like you work 8 years on the Hill, you think, the federal government, you go to a master's and get your master's, you think, and then you actually are working within a federal agency and you're like, oh, like I was missing the, you can't see the tree through the forest or whatever, like you're missing it until you're there. So that's been really interesting and exciting for me.
And just one of the other things that I think it's important for people listening to understand, the folks we're talking about, the resources you have available to you, these are what we would refer to as professional staff. Now, you all have your jobs because there was an administration shift. You guys were on the Hill. The election went in the way of the Democrats, then they have to now staff. So you two were pulled in from the Hill to go work on the inside. Could not be happier for the both of you that you're getting this opportunity. I think the Hill's a lesser place for it, but I'm just so excited that you guys get this chance. But the people who were there that you're talking to, they were there, a year ago for the other team.
Or 10 to 20 years ago.
Yeah, 20. That's talks about the level of expertise that the professional staff has that then you use to be able to help develop policy for the new administration. I mean, talk about that if you would.
Sure. So that's been one of my favorite things is working with the career staff who can recall how the agency interacted with congressional offices on specific issues during certain administrations. Like, this is how it was done during the Trump administration, the Obama administration, the Bush administration. And it's like really great to have that infrastructure and that knowledge, because it helps you with the transition a lot easier about like, oh, this came up in like 86. So this is how the department handled it then. We could do it that way, or you could go down this road. And I don't know, it's like, it's really awesome to have those careers. They're very dedicated to their job. They're really great people, and I just feel very lucky to be able to work with them.
Yeah, I mean, I think they probably have a more difficult job than we do, right? Like, they have new bosses every 4 years, or even more often than that if the political appointee leaves after a year and a half, and they have to be flexible and learn new working styles and new management style. And I'm just always impressed with the amount of information and knowledge, institutional knowledge they have. Like, it is, I think of some of my colleagues from the Hill that I used to work with, and I think of who these folks are. Like, I just feel like I've leveled up is how I feel. No shade to my former colleagues who are amazing and do amazing work and are super intelligent too, but it's just a different, a little bit of a different stratosphere, I feel like.
And how has that gone for you all, moving from a world where, I mean, let's be frank, at most you're in charge of like a legislative correspondent, and now you have to figure out how to hold this relationship where you've got this 8-word title and people responding to you. I mean, how is that comfort level of having to move from just you're basically yourself and maybe somebody riding shotgun with you to like, now I get to work with all these folks. I mean, how does that personally feel for you to be able to change into that position? being at this point in your careers and what you've done? I'm curious.
Do you want me to answer, Lauren? I'll go
Oh,
first.
you go first.
I think when you work in a congressional office, at least on the House side, you're maximum working with your colleagues, a group of 10 people. And so while you're not managing those people, I was a legislative director in my previous office, so I was managing like 3 to 4 people, but you're constantly working as in like a team, as like one apparatus, and you're moving towards one goal. I would say in this office, it's multiple teams, and sometimes the goals aren't always clear as to like what the main focus is. And I think that's been a little bit of a difficult part of this position. I would say the other thing is working remotely, like managing remotely is, meeting new people, trying to get that collegial relationship of like, I get you, I hear you, I'm here for you, and do it remotely, I think has been a little bit difficult. And then the only other thing I'd say is the age range, right? Like on the Hill, a lot of folks are, 30 and younger. And so you have that kind of understanding of one another. And then you come over to the agency side, and like Lauren was saying, some people have been there since the 80s, like before I was born. And so it's it's engaging with them in that relationship and understanding them as a colleague and then as a manager to be able to be effective. And it's a learning process.
So you're dealing with folks who, when you say TikTok, they're thinking about a clock. Yeah, I get that. Lauren?
Sure. So, when I was on the Senate side, and I did all of my time on the Senate side, so I didn't have any House experience. So we definitely have a bigger team, and I would have maybe 2 to 3 people under me. The one thing that I was thankful for, though, is that I would have a fellow in the congressional office who would usually be much older than me. And I find that being able to manage folks with different level experiences, and I mean, these folks had either like a medical degree or a doctorate degree. I have a law degree, but they would have multiple degrees and like just very smart. And so I feel like that experience has been helpful to translate to the folks I have to manage that are career staff, and that they have that long engagement, that long experience. They're from a different generation. But I think each time that I am navigating those experiences, I make a point to get to know them, right? So I do one-on-ones with my team. I try to do one-on-ones with the people I work with at CMS. And that way, if you have people who get to know you a little bit and have like a personal feel for you, then I find that the engagement and the work that you ask them to do, they're much more eager to do that, because they're buying into what I'm doing and what my vision is for my portfolio.
Excellent. Policy development and policy communication, and talking about the integrated nature of the role. And I'm curious and see if I'm describing this correctly, and if you guys wanted to expand on it, which is, as you all are looking at certain policy areas, and you can pick one at your comfort level of discussing it, which is, Lauren, you'll work on an area where you guys are considering the policy development, what the policy is going to look like. Now, Leslie, your role is not necessarily to be part of the development side, but your role is to be able to go into a room and go, here are the 3 or 4 people that are going to set themselves on fire if you get this wrong. And so how does that then, the challenges both of you have in working with people who are developing the policy and then communicating the policy to make sure you don't get it wrong? Because just real quickly, I mean, we've seen this happen in our careers over and over again, where HHS rolls out a policy, CMS often. Remember the Part D drug benefits, 6 protected classes. There was CMS rolled out, okay, we're going to get rid of them. And over this period of time, we're getting rid of them. And the world went berserk. And you sit there and go, now you think back about that and you think, okay, our job is to make the policy, but also never do that. So, I mean, talk about those types of things, if you would.
I think that is like the crux of what is difficult as far as like the steep learning curve that I'm having right now, is like the internal navigation, and then bringing my Hill expertise and what I know about how the Hill react to certain policies. And so I find myself lots of times being like, yeah, that's fucked up. Sorry. I'm like, no, that, the Hill's not going to work with that. Like the Hill's going to say this, the Hill's going to say that. you need to know this. And so I find that as long as I'm able to be like, hey, just giving you a heads up, let's manage expectations, then I feel okay. And then, I think Leslie has a harder job of like, let's socialize this. And then like, let's go to the Hill and tell them that this is what we need. And that is hard. But as long as I'm like a little bit of a truth teller, I feel like it's okay. But I don't think we've had any of those like really bad moments just yet.
Not that
I think we talked a lot about this in your course, Rodney. I feel like kind of like the policy development and then the communication side, and how do you get to your end goal and like find success in that world. And I think, Congress is very important, but they're also not the only person in the room. There's the American public, there's business community, there's the physician community, there's hospitals, there's a bunch of other stakeholders. And so I think it's working collaboratively, like to make, if Congress isn't going to be happy, like what kind of validators can we send over to help, like Lauren said, socialize and like.
And also like how unhappy are they going to be? Like on a scale.
Is this a one day, is this a 24-hour, I'm going to be unhappy, or is this going to be a 2-week? And yeah, I mean, like, I think the other interesting thing about being at the agency is seeing the bigger picture, right? Like this is one announcement and we know about 5 others that are coming that maybe they'll be happy about. And so it's leveraging that knowledge and that information to maybe lessen the blow if someone's going to be really upset about something.
And you just said it, and I was fascinated. You've already made that transition from, you don't represent just a district in Wisconsin or the state of Maryland. You now, realize your bigger picture. You're America, and frankly beyond if you're doing some of the other stuff. I mean that your constituency changes radically when you cross the street.
Well, yes, and I think what I did learn from being in a member's office and representing 750,000 people in, in the Midwest is that idea of like making sure your constituents know that you're working on their behalf is the same in our position still today. And so that like process of communicating the work that Lauren and her team are doing of developing that policy and explaining how it's going to help someone access healthcare more effectively or in a more affordable fashion, or make sure their family has access to childcare, or their grandpa can get their drugs at the cost they need. That it's like all of those things is still the same in this position. It's just, yeah, exactly, everyone.
And the other thing, Ronnie, I think is like, you at this level, you just have to have a tougher skin. Like I've found that, I'm going to have people who just call me at like 10:30 and want to yell at me. I'm like, okay, let's ride with it. We're riding, we're going, right? And I just have to absorb that. And like, I exercise quite a bit and that helps. And so, it's just one of those things, like I have to toughen up. You can't please everybody, but you're going to do the best to make sure you have open and like transparent communication.
Yeah, I think with anything, like Lauren said, it's just about people being heard. People want to be heard. And so as long as you're making yourself available and picking up the phone at 10:30 to get yelled at, and they know they can call you to do that, I think there's the ability to navigate those relationships.
So what would you tell somebody who is still on the Hill, this was something I never expected, or this is something that I didn't see coming as I moved from the Rayburn building to the Humphrey building? And you were Hart building, if I recall, Lauren.
Yes, for all 3 offices, I was in the Hart building. For me, what has been really amazing is just like being in the room and like having decisions being made and being at the table and listening to those decisions being made. And like, I'm not always like commenting or like, they're like, maybe it's not my place to say something, but if I do say something, a lot of the times they're like, oh, well, Lauren, do you have something to say? And so that's been really nice. You're like, wow, this is crazy. So that's been fun.
Well, there was no question you were capable. So the idea that you'd be in the room and being listened to is not terribly shocking to me. Leslie, what about you?
Yeah, I agree. I feel like it's typical like policy nerd, like getting to meet Dr. Nora Volko, who's the director of the National Institute for Drug Abuse, who I like for years just admired her work and the work she did to like be in the Zoom, like coaching her on how to talk to the Hill when we briefed the Hill, was like, what is happening? Like, how did I end up here? But, for me, I always wanted to see each part of the federal government. Like, I always felt like I don't have a law degree and I probably won't get one. So maybe the judiciary is not for me, but like from the legislative and the executive branch, like that has always been my goal, is to get those perspectives, to get a better understanding of like really how that engagement and process works and moves forward. And so I think being here and being able to see it on that side has been really awesome.
So one just trivia question, but it'd be a fun. What floor are you on?
We're on the
You're
fourth.
on 4.
Yeah.
Which one?
4th.
So you guys are both on 4. So there's in the Humphrey Building, it's a lot of decisions get made on the 4th floor, but then some go up to the 6th floor is a long running joke, which is that's where the secretary is. So when you talk about it, it's like, so you're on the 4th floor and trying to avoid having the need to go to the 6th floor as much as possible, right?
Yes.
Yes, and for those of you, again, less familiar with DC, the term of art is brutalist architecture, and the Humphrey Building is wonderfully brutalist in every way, looking at it. So I'd like to transition, if I could, and this is to give, when we do this, Shannon and Brian are chomping at the bit to get in here because they can't wait to ask questions. So, but the last transitional thing I'll do before I bring them on, but this is something because we have a lot of students here who are looking at you. They look at me and they go, 87, Jesus, that makes you what, 70? That you guys, though, are still very young people. And they look at you and go, okay, how did you get there? So can you just walk through your pathway from when you were undergraduate to then, okay, these are the steps I made to let me that led me here, and maybe some of the things along the way that you thought were the key decisions that helped you get here.
Go first, Leslie.
Yeah, this will be cool because I don't think we know this about each other yet. I'm curious how Lauren got here. I went to UW-Madison. Like I mentioned before, I've always been interested in like government news policy making. And so it was something I always wanted to do. And I think it's probably because I grew up close enough to the Beltway that like it was in my world. But I wanted to go to a undergrad campus that had like state government close by so I could engage in that work. And so I went to UW-Madison, which is where the capital of Wisconsin is, in Madison. And I did a lot of internships, both within the Democratic Party of Wisconsin, but then also in the state capitol. And through that, I ended up, when I graduated in 2012, I hopped on a congressional campaign and worked my butt off, worked long hours. In general, this career, I think I will say it was just long hours. I worked long hours. I got on that campaign, and when he won, asked me to come to DC. And so that's how I ended up I worked for Senator Baldwin before she actually became a senator. I helped transition her office from her office to the new member, Congressman Pocan. And then I worked for him for 8 years. He was a great boss. I loved the work I did. I didn't just do healthcare, by the way. I did foreign policy, and I did education policy for a bit, and defense policy, which are all really interesting and engaging. And so I did that work for a long time, and I loved working for him. But then I kind of felt like I had reached my peak, and I needed something else. I was feeling like I wasn't digging deep enough in policy issues. So I decided to go to grad school while working. I kind of like fumbled with the idea of a law degree, but it wasn't, I was like, I don't think I want to ever practice law. And so why would I pay that much money to like go to law school? So I chose to go get a master's in public policy, which I'm really glad I did. I think that was like the decision that I knew, I could continue to work on the Hill, but I knew that having that master's degree would get me to my next stage of my career. I also like volunteered on campaigns throughout my time. So I would take time, like I took a month off in 2014 and 2 weeks off in 2016 to volunteer on like competitive Democratic congressional races to just expand my network and engage with others, which I think also helped me get here. I got my graduate degree. I finished that in 2020, May 2020. And then, I think what I will say is like election years always create new political and policy jobs, both in state government, in federal government, local government. And I think me being strategic about when I was looking for new positions and to like strategically like beef up my resume at a time when in 3 months they like newly electeds would be looking to fill their offices is I feel like how I've kind of been able to be successful in progressing in my career.
Laura?
I'm going to go a little further back to 8th grade field trip. And I was like, oh man, I really got to be in DC. This is like a cool place. The Library of Congress has like every book ever printed. I've got to hang out there. And so I was like driving the roads in Mississippi one evening. Like, as that's what you do. Like you go riding around the cotton fields. And I heard this ad on the radio about this scholarship called the U.S. Senate Youth Program. And like, you could get the scholarship to go to DC for a week. And I was like, that sounds cool. I'm going to like figure that out. So basically there's a little bit more to it. Like you have to like take a test and you have to score at a certain point to like be asked back for an interview. Then you have to go through the interview process. Anyways, I got through all these steps and I got the scholarship. And so that was, and I only say that because that's the money I used to move to DC after law school, is I had that money and I had kept it for 7 years, basically, through college and law school. And then moved up here with that money and didn't have a job. When I was in law school, I had done positions at women's advocacy orgs for women's reproductive health. And I was really interested in that issue. But when I went to go lobby Congress, like congressional offices, I noticed that the people who really had the power were on the other side of the table, the people who were like writing the laws. So if I wanted to see change in this issue area, then I need to be on the other side of the table. So I was like, all right, fine. I'm going to like stop this advocacy stuff and I'm going to go on the other side of the table and like try to get a job on the Hill. The thing is I'm a Democrat from Mississippi, and that's very hard. And so what am I going to do? So I started targeting members, and I'm part Asian. My dad's Asian American. And so I said, I'm going to target women Asian members. And I'm going to tell them this is what I want to work on. And this is why they should hire me. And so I like went through 3 to 5 offices, and Hirono's office was like, who are you? Okay, we can give you a clerkship. And I was like, cool. And so as soon as I passed the bar, they hired me on this council, and I got to do a lot of cool issues like voting rights, women's reproductive rights. And then because of that work that I did with Hirono on Judiciary Committee, Senator Blumenthal's office, when they needed a health LA, they said, hey, do you want to come work for us, but do all of healthcare? And so I really didn't know what I was getting into because I didn't know the difference between Medicare and Medicaid. I was like, I know about the ACA, but that's about it. And so then I went to all of healthcare. And then I got recruited to go to Cardin's office. And so I think each time I did something, I just really worked really, really hard to build up my expertise and reputation in that issue. And then I was able to go to the next opportunity. And so that's how I made my way through the Hill. And then for this opportunity, I knew I was interested in administration. And so I started talking to folks about what would that look like? What is this mysterious box? And how do I get into that mysterious box? And I don't know if it helped or not, but somehow, they put my name up, I got an interview, and I was so nervous because these interviews are 10 minutes. And you're like, how can I make an impression in 10 minutes? But I did, and I'm here. And I'm super excited. And I think the one thing that I'm most excited about is all the relationships I made through my time in the Senate and then working with House is I get to continue to use those relationships and talk to people like Rodney, Rodney, I did not realize you were a doctor. So hello, Dr. Whitlock.
And And you all, correct me if I'm wrong, it's Rose and Melanie run both of your two respective shops. Do I have that right? Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
So it's Melanie is our Senate confirmed assistant secretary. Then Rose is our principal deputy. And then it's us.
So whatever you do, you cannot let them know that I had you two on without them, because they will never let me forget that. So yeah, and so the fact that I've got so many folks that I know and really have respected over the years there makes me so happy. Brian, Shannon, if you're ready to come back on camera and take over for the next part of the conversation, where you guys want to lead it from your perspective.
This has been just fantastic. We've been having a great time texting each other throughout this conversation. So I'm actually an inside the Beltway baby. I grew up in Falls Church. And so I totally hear this reality of having grown up in this setting and therefore feeling like this is what you must do with life. I totally get that. I think that actually Brian is going to start us off with the first question tonight. We have lots of questions for you just because we're having such a great time with this conversation.
Yeah, so I'll start. So earlier you all were talking about the expertise of kind of career civil servants in the bureaucracy who you kind of rely on to make policy and kind of navigate the process. And so a question that came to my mind as you all were talking about that is, what's something that you wish more people knew about how the federal bureaucracy works?
Well, I would say, on the Hill, you're like very much like email, 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 answer my email now. And then on the career side, they're like, I see your email. I will get to your email. Do you know what I mean? Like, they will get to the email, but it's a much, you can't rush anybody. It's all in the right time. And people leave at 5 o'clock and like don't work on the weekend. So like politicals, we don't, but like if I really need an answer, I'm going to have to find that answer out. And I might be using Google.
And I guess just real quick, the context for the question is, as somebody who teaches American government, I think it's fair to say that the institution that is often kind of the most mysterious is the bureaucracy. So that's kind of why I was interested.
I think that's a great point, Brian, because I felt that too. And like, I'll just give you an example. In our office, the assistant secretary for legislation, there's 8 political appointees, but I think there's 25 career staff. So that's 25 people who, no matter who is the president of the United States, they are there doing the legislative work of engaging with Congress and providing feedback on policies that are being developed and, helping members communicate with their districts on what funds have gone out the door, all those things. And they're doing that for decades. I will say, I think the career jobs are really interesting. I wish my family growing up were big Democrats. So that's really all I knew. But I almost wish when I was in college that I knew about the opportunity to do and be a career civil servant and do this work without the political slant, and just to be able to be there and because that is the really interesting work of you have that, you've seen, this one bill and the iteration, or this one law and the iteration over years of work, and you've gotten to work on it. And I think that's a really interesting role if you are interested in public policy, but don't feel strongly about being involved in a political party. Mm-hmm. I think that's a really interesting career.
So I'm going to follow up a bit on the bureaucracy part. So as a sociologist, when we talk about bureaucracy, it's Max Weber, and it's all about rationality and the way in which the rationality can actually become so heavy, it becomes irrational. It doesn't sound like a lot of fun. We talk a lot about things like disenchantment. And then Leslie, you're talking and you use this word exciting to describe what it feels like working for the federal government. And it just busts stereotypes, right? In a way that I think is exciting and interesting. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that, because it seems like there are cool opportunities that we don't promote very much, in part because there's this kind of negative stereotype attached to bureaucratic work, and yet our entire government doesn't function without it.
Yeah, maybe I'm just a nerd. I don't know. I love what I do, and I'm lucky to do something that I love. So maybe that's why I use that language. But I think especially we grew up in like the age of the internet, right? Like as things were becoming more accessible and to like the everyday, you didn't have to like read a newspaper or whatever. And I do think like it's exciting because if you want to know why a decision was made or how it was made, you have to go back to the decision makers, and that's our elected officials and the federal bureaucracy, right? Like people also forget about the huge amount of regulation, which is really a lot in Lauren's world, that the federal government does. And I think there is an iterative process. It's not just like an authoritarian, it is democratic in that way. And I think that's interesting and exciting to be a part of. And so I think people forget that that's what a lot of the bureaucracy is that iterative process. And maybe because it's only happening in the Beltway, but the internet has made it accessible. Like you can submit a comment on a regulation. Maybe it's not the prettiest website or the most easy to understand, but like that is something that people can engage in. And I think they forget. And what I love about my job is communicating that. And I've always loved that. I do it to my friends, probably like are over it, but like I love talking about that.
So it sounds like you do a bit of translation from that sort of bureaucratic work to a more general, you enjoy that translation to a more general kind of conversation.
Yeah, I'm never someone like, if I want to complain about something, that's great, but like I'd rather take action. And so I think like that's my, I give folks action items, what they can do. Like, I get that you're upset, but here's what you can do about it. Or here's something that we're working on that you can engage in the process of. But yeah, that is the communication side. I think that's like a huge part one of working on the Hill. You're not only communicating to your member of your boss of what something is, but you're also trying to communicate it to their constituents.
You want to jump in, Brian?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I have another question. By the way, about commenting on a rule, as soon as we can post, what is it, animated GIFs on a rule, I'm in. I'm in. That'll be my social media platform. Anyways.
Yeah. Next time I talk to OMB, I'll let them know.
Yeah, that would be great. This is the Brian Parsons suggestion. Anyways, so something that you all were talking about toward the end, and I was glad Rodney asked about it, was just kind of like how you both started, your journeys and how you ended up where you are. And so, for students who might be tuning in this evening who are thinking, wow, like this was a really cool conversation. The stuff that Leslie and Lauren are working on in their careers, this seems super interesting. And I can see myself wanting to do that. What would you tell our students about what the first steps might look like after graduation if they were interested in this kind of work?
Well, the one thing I'll say that I don't want your students to be intimidated by is like the cost it is to live in DC, right? Or the cost to do your education in DC. And so one thing that I did is that I worked really, really hard to find scholarships every summer that I interned in DC. And I worked to find scholarships for like all these opportunities. And it's like maybe after you graduate, there's not that scholarship opportunity, but there could be like paying internships. There could be those things. So I'd want to make sure people know, like, don't let that be a barrier. I was lucky never to let that be a barrier. My dad told me that if I wanted to go somewhere, I'd have to find a way to pay for it. So like, you can do it too, right? You can do that too. But to start off, I think the one thing, if you really want to work on the Hill, it seems like really mysterious also, like, how do I get on the Hill? And the one thing that was really hard for me is having these informational conversations, because coming from the South, you know, we're like very genuine people. And so like, why am I just having an informational conversation to get a job? I did not understand that. And it felt very uncomfortable for me. But I think what was key though, is that I would have those informational sessions, but also make genuine connections. And so like, if that's the culture you're from, use that to your advantage, like talk to people, you can make that genuine connection, but also don't be afraid to ask them like, how did you get to where you're going? And do you have any opportunities that you know about or that you could send my way? And the other thing about being from the South that I had to get over is like bothering people, right? Like if I had a coffee and I had a great interaction, then I would need to follow up with that person and say, hey, this is an opening. Do you know anyone in that office that you could connect me with? And so at first that felt like me bothering them or being aggressive. And that could be like me being a woman from the South as well. So you're just going to have to get over that, right? Like you're not bothering anybody. They're like, expect that of you. And so you just kind of have to put yourself out there a little bit more than maybe you're comfortable with, but just do that and you're going to be okay.
I echo everything Lauren's saying. I think she also like made a point earlier to say like, what are the things you're passionate about? And then identify people in the public policy space that also are passionate about those things and reach out to them, because we all got here by someone else reaching a hand out and saying like, hey, you should come along with me, or I want to give you this opportunity because I can tell you're excited to learn about it or do the work. And so I think don't be afraid to reach out and make those connections, because like, again, most people that I've had interaction with DC want to help other young people come do this work. So you just, like Lauren said, get over the fear of like bothering someone or feeling like you're a burden, because most people are wanting to engage with like a younger generation who are excited about doing this type of stuff.
And I'll have to say, I'm never more disappointed than when I've had like a really great coffee with someone and they never follow up about how I can help them. Because I like want to really help them. So please follow up.
And then the other thing I'd say in terms of like looking, like where do you start is one, like your state connections. So if you're from Virginia, you know, there's both the state government and the federal government. And then there's also some huge counties around this area that also have a pretty robust like government structure that are really exciting, and you're close enough. If federal government is what you want to do, I would say I know a lot of folks, one, who work in the administration, but also in like the DC federal policy sphere that started in local government and made their way to the federal side. Same thing with Wisconsin, actually. Like most of the folks that worked in the congressman's office like started in his state office. And so I would just say that too, like, don't feel like you have to start in the biggest fish in the pond. Like you can start local and move your way up just to get those experiences of like, oh, this is what it's right to like write a memo or brief a principal or go to a press conference and set that up. Like getting those experiences, even if they're at the smaller level, are really helpful, and you can leverage those to move your way through your career.
Yeah.
One
really
of the
great
things,
advice.
It's great advice. And you're also like tying together something that Rodney's now been talking to us about here this is our second year, which is relationships, and just how crucial relationships are at every step of the process. And we're getting close to running out of time. So if I'm sounding like a teacher, it's because I'm kind of doing this wrap up thing that teachers do, right? But this is a really important lesson. Roanoke College is all about relationships. And so if you see the people on your screen right now, particularly Dr. Parsons and Dr. Whitlock and me, and you want to reach out to Leslie or Lauren and you don't really know how to do that, contact one of us. That's what we're here to do, right? Is to make these connections to help you get these next steps moving. And then I do have one last question, because I'm the public health person here. So none of you are trained in public health. So how did you end up specifically working in health, and how has that been? I wasn't trained in it either, so I'm with you.
Go.
Sure. I started working on the Hill in 2014, which was the year the ACA website rolled out, and it was my job to answer the phones for the congressman.
Oh.
So I like quickly had to figure out what the heck was going on and what the law was, what it did, why people were angry. And I think like that just really intrigued me because it touched like, and everyone engages with the healthcare system at one point or another. And then over the years, I just became more interested in it. It was more exciting. I just kind of felt like I don't ever want to be bored, and healthcare was something that one could help people and two had so many different areas and dynamics that you could go into. So that's kind of how I ended up doing health policy.
And so actually my parents were both medical professionals. My dad's a physician, my mom's a nurse. And I thought like maybe I'll do that, but no, I became a lawyer to they're like, ooh, that's not great. But the reason I got into it was because healthcare is like very much a consumer protection issue I see. And I was very much into like, how can we protect people's access to healthcare or people's rights to certain services? And so that's really the lens that I've approached it with. And so I get super excited to work on issues where I feel like an insurance company has done such and such, a hospital hasn't done this, or, the patient isn't represented how they want to be or treated a certain way. And so I'm like, what can I do for that person? And how can I help that person? And so I get really excited about thinking how I can help just any like regular old American patient and like help them navigate the system, because it is very hard to navigate. And so that's how I got into it, was having that lens of like, I want to help others get through this because it's difficult.
Awesome. Thank you both so much.
Right. Well, I'll close us out here. So thank you to Rodney, Leslie, and Lauren for just a wonderful conversation. I just really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for being here. And thanks to everybody who joined us tonight for this NOKELive event. Please visit our alumni page at roanoke.edu/alumni for all events that will be upcoming, both virtual and now that we're having in-person things happening too, which is kind of nice. So take care, everybody, and stay well.